The cold morning air bit through Dr. Kongho's protective suit as he stepped off the transport ship onto the rocky surface of Kepler 442c. His boots crunched against the frozen ground, leaving deep prints in the frost that had formed overnight. Behind him, his team of alien archaeologists spread out across the barren landscape, their scanning equipment humming quietly in the thin atmosphere. "Another human battlefield," muttered Commander Velthak, his four eyes scanning the horizon with obvious distaste. The insectoid alien's mandibles clicked nervously as he adjusted his weapon belt. 12 years since the hegemony wiped them out, and we're still cleaning up their mess. Dr. Kongho ignored the comment and focused on the scanner readings. The Galactic Council had sent them here to document human military installations before salvaging any useful technology. Every species in known history left behind weapons, fortifications, and strategic defensive positions after major battles. The humans should be no different, but his scanner was showing something strange. "Sir," called Jinsu, his young research assistant, from a ridge about 50 meters away. "You need to see this." Kongho climbed the rocky slope, his breathing heavy in the thin air. When he reached the top, he stopped completely. Below them, in the center of what should have been a strategic military position, stood a massive black stone monument. It rose nearly 30 meters into the pale sky, its polished surface reflecting the weak sunlight like a dark mirror. "This makes no sense," Commander Velthak said, joining them at the ridge. "The humans control the high ground here. Perfect position for artillery or defensive structures. Instead, they built, what is this thing?" Dr. Kongho was already running his scanner over the monument. The readings showed it was made from local stone, precisely cut and fitted together without any bonding agents. But it was the surface that made him stop breathing for a moment. Names. Thousands of them. Carved into the black stone in neat, orderly rows were names in 17 different languages and writing systems. Human names in English, Korean, Spanish, and Arabic scripts. But mixed among them were other names, names that made his blood run cold. "Commander," he said quietly, "some of these names, they're hegemony soldiers." Velthak's four eyes focused on the monument with new attention. Impossible. Humans wouldn't honor their enemies. But there they were. Zekdar Moonclaw, Velnara Stormfist, Dexji the Bold, names that could only belong to hegemony warriors. The humans had carved the names of their attackers right alongside their own dead. Jinsu was working on translating the inscription at the monument's base. His voice trembled as he read it aloud. "Here fell warriors of two worlds, united in death, remembered in peace. May their sacrifice teach us the cost of war and the value of understanding." The words hung in the cold air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about warfare. Dr. Kongho walked slowly around the monument's base. More inscriptions covered every surface. Battle dates, unit numbers, and what appeared to be personal messages. One section caught his attention, a message in simple English that his translator easily converted. "To my daughter Sarah, I fought not because I hated what was in front of me, but because I loved what was behind me. Learn from our mistakes. Build a better world. Captain Michael Chun, 47th Colonial Defense." "This is military intelligence," Commander Velthak said, his voice sharp with realization. "Unit positions, battle strategies, casualty reports. Why would they make this information public?" More disturbing discoveries followed. The monument contained detailed tactical analyses of the battle, including honest assessments of human mistakes and hegemony advantages. It was like reading a military textbook, written by both sides of the conflict. Jinsu found something else that made everyone stop talking. Hidden in the monument's base was a small quantum storage device, still active after more than a decade. The data it contained was staggering. Video testimonies from soldiers on both sides, recorded battle footage, strategic discussions, and personal letters home. They documented everything. Dr. Kongho whispered. Every decision, every loss, every lesson learned. But the most unsettling discovery came when Jinsu accessed the monument's construction records. The humans had built it during the battle, not after. While their comrades were fighting and dying, some of them had been carving names and stories into stone. They knew they were going to lose, Commander Velthak said, his voice filled with confusion. They knew the hegemony was going to destroy them. So instead of building better weapons or stronger defenses, they built this. Dr. Kong Ho stared at the monument as the weak sun began to set behind it. In the fading light, the carved name seemed to move and shift, as if the dead were trying to speak across the years. "We need to report this to the Council immediately," he said. "And we need to check other human battle sites. If this is some kind of pattern, what pattern could this possibly be?" Velthak demanded. "It's just sentimental human weakness. They cared more about feelings than fighting. That's why they lost." But as they prepared to leave the cold, empty battlefield, Dr. Kong Ho couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Something that might explain why these monuments felt less like graves and more like warnings. 3 months later, Dr. Kong Ho stood in the great assembly hall of the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. The massive chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species took their seats. Holographic displays floated above each section, showing real-time translations in hundreds of languages. Council Speaker Mordan's tentacles writhed as he called for order. "Dr. Kong Ho, present your findings to the Assembly." Kong Ho activated his datapad, and the hall's central hologram came to life. A three-dimensional map of human space appeared, with red dots marking every former battlefield they had investigated. "Honor counselors," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's sound system. "My team has now examined 47 major human battle sites across 12 sectors. What we have found challenges everything we understand about military strategy." The first image showed the monument from Kepler, 442c, its black stone surface gleaming in the recorded sunlight. Murmurs rippled through the assembly as the alien representatives saw the carved names of both human and hegemony soldiers. "This is not an isolated case," Kong Ho continued. "On every world where humans fought, they built similar structures. The hologram shifted to show battlefield after battlefield. On the desert world of Eridus Prime, humans had constructed a glass memorial that caught and reflected the light of twin suns. On the ice planet Vergla, they had carved names directly into a frozen mountain face. On the jungle world of Redania, they had grown living trees in precise patterns, each one representing a fallen soldier. Admiral Vextai, the Council's supreme military commander, rose from his seat. His scarred carapace gleamed under the chamber lights as he spoke. "Dr. Kong Ho, are you telling this assembly that humans consistently chose to build these decorations instead of proper military installations?" "That appears to be correct, Admiral." A wave of shock chittering, clicking, and warbling sounds filled the chamber as the various species processed this information. To most galactic civilizations, it was unthinkable. Jin Su, who had been granted permission to assist with the presentation, activated another set of images. These showed what the humans could have built instead: fortified positions, weapons factories, training facilities. Computer models demonstrated how different the war's outcome might have been with proper military construction. "Look at this," Admiral Vextai said, pointing at one of the holographic models. On Centauri 7, the humans controlled a mountain pass that could have been turned into an impregnable fortress. Instead, they built a meditation garden with stone benches arranged around a central fountain. The image showed exactly that: a peaceful garden where terraced flower beds spelled out messages of hope in a dozen languages. Small plaques marked spots where individual soldiers had died, each one containing their personal story and final words. Council Speaker Mordan leaned forward, his large eyes reflecting the hologram's light. "Dr. Kong Ho, what tactical advantage could these structures possibly provide?" "From a conventional military standpoint, none at all," Kong Ho replied. "But there's something else we discovered." The hologram changed again, showing construction records and resource allocation data. Even during active battles, humans had diverted significant materials and manpower to building their memorials. On some worlds, up to 20% of their resources had gone to monument construction instead of weapons production. "This is madness," declared Councillor Hrexka, her crystalline body structure resonating with disbelief. "They weakened themselves deliberately." "It gets worse," Jinsu added, bringing up financial records. Many of these monuments were funded by private donations from human civilians. Families would send money to honor soldiers they had never met. Children would sell personal belongings to contribute to memorial funds. The assembly erupted in confused discussions. Representative Quilltalk's feathers ruffled as he spoke for his bird-like species. In our culture, resources go to the living, not the dead. This behavior is completely irrational. But Dr. Kong Ho had saved the most disturbing discovery for last. There's one more thing. We found evidence that humans built many of these monuments while the battles were still happening. Soldiers would take breaks from fighting to carve names or place memorial stones. The hologram showed battlefield footage recovered from human archives. In the middle of a fierce firefight, human soldiers could be seen dragging wounded comrades to safety, then stopping to mark the spot where they fell with small stone markers. Even under enemy fire, they took time to honor their dead. They prioritized remembrance over survival, Admiral Vextai said, his voice filled with disgust. This explains everything. The humans lost because they were too busy mourning to fight effectively. They were weak, emotional, and impractical. Nods and sounds of agreement came from around the chamber. It seemed like the obvious explanation. Humans had been conquered because they cared more about feelings and fighting, more about the past and the future. But Dr. Kong Ho felt a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. Something about this explanation felt incomplete. The humans he had studied seemed too intelligent, too organized, too purposeful to make such obvious strategic mistakes. "There is one more matter," he said quietly. "We found a survivor, a human military officer, who was in cryo-sleep when her world fell. She has agreed to speak with us." The chamber fell completely silent. After 12 years, they would finally hear from one of the people who had built these mysterious monuments. And Dr. Kong Ho suspected her answers would surprise them all. The detention cell was cold and gray, with walls made of smooth metal that reflected the harsh overhead lights. Sergeant Major Soo-Jin Kim sat perfectly straight on the simple metal bench, her hands folded in her lap. Despite spending 12 years in cryo-freeze and weeks in council custody, she maintained the bearing of a professional soldier. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her brown eyes watched the door with calm alertness. Dr. Kong Ho entered first, carrying a recording device and a data pad. Behind him came Admiral Vextai, his armored exoskeleton clicking against the doorframe, followed by Council Interrogator Zephyron, whose tentacle head swayed gently as he prepared his psychic scanning equipment. Soo-Jin looked at each of them without fear or hostility. She had been through military interrogations before, though never with aliens who could read minds. "Sergeant Major Kim," Dr. Kong Ho began, activating his recorder. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. We want to understand something about human military practices." "Ask your questions," Soo-Jin replied simply. Admiral Vextai stepped forward, his 4 eyes focusing on the human. "We have examined 47 human battlefields. Instead of building proper military installations, your species constructed monuments and memorials. We need to know why you made such tactically unsound decisions." Soo-Jin was quiet for a long moment, studying the alien admiral. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. "You think we built monuments instead of weapons. You understand nothing about what those monuments really were. Then explain it to us," Zephyron said, his psychic sensors reaching toward Soo-Jin's mind. He expected to find the typical human emotions: grief, regret, fear. Instead, he sensed something much more complex and disturbing. "Admiral," Soo-Jin said, looking directly at Vextai, "tell me how your species honors warriors who die in battle." Vextai's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Honor? We stripped their equipment for reuse and replaced them with fresh soldiers. Dead warriors serve no tactical purpose." Soo-Jin nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she already knew. "And when new soldiers join your ranks, what do they learn about previous battles?" "Basic tactical information, unit formations, weapon specifications. Nothing more is needed." "Do they learn the names of those who died?" "Of course not. Why would that matter?" Soo-Jin stood up from the bench, her movement still sharp and precise despite her age. She walked to the cell's single small window and looked out at the stars beyond. "That's why your people never truly understand war," she said quietly. You treat soldiers like equipment. Use them up, throw them away, get new ones. For humans, every death matters. Every story matters. Dr. Kong Ho leaned forward, genuinely interested. What do you mean by stories? Every name carved on our monuments tells a complete story. How they lived, how they fought, what they learned, how they died, and what they discovered. When human children visit those monuments, they don't just see names. They see teachers. She turned back to face her interrogators. We have an old saying, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Our monuments weren't just about remembering the dead. They were about learning from them. Learning what? Zephron asked, his psychic readings showing increasing confusion. The human's emotional pattern was unlike anything he had encountered, not weakness or sentimentality, but something far more dangerous. Everything, Sujin replied. Every tactical mistake that got someone killed. Every successful strategy that saved lives. Every moment when someone made a choice between duty and survival, between fear and courage. Our monuments were schools that never closed, teachers that never stopped speaking. Admiral Vextai scoffed. Emotional nonsense. Battle is about strength, numbers, and superior firepower. Is it? Sujin asked. Then why did it take the hegemony 3 years to defeat us? By your logic. With their superior numbers and technology, they should have crushed us in 3 months. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Kong Ho checked his datapad and realized the human was right. The war had lasted much longer than military analysts had predicted, because Sujin continued, every time they kill one of us, 10 more learn from that death. Every monument they destroyed had already taught its lessons to thousands of visitors. Every story they tried to silence had already been shared with the next generation. Jin Su, who had been quietly taking notes in the corner, looked up with sudden understanding. The monuments were databases. Sujin smiled at the young alien, the first warm expression she had shown. Smart boy. Yes, they were databases. But more than that, they were inspiration engines. When a young human visited a monument and read about Captain Chun who held a position against impossible odds, or Lieutenant Park who sacrificed herself to save civilians, that young person didn't just learn tactics. They learned what it means to be worth something. Zephron's psychic readings suddenly spiked with alarm. The emotion he had been struggling to identify in the human's mind finally became clear. It wasn't grief or fear or even pride. It was hope. You're still fighting, he whispered. Sujin looked directly at him, and for the first time, she smiled fully. Sergeant Major, we never stopped fighting. You just didn't understand what our weapons were. The room fell completely silent as the implications of her words sank in. The monuments weren't symbols of human defeat. They were human victory, carved in stone and planted like seeds across the galaxy. Dr. Kong Ho worked alone in his laboratory, the soft blue glow of his workbench the only light in the darkened room. It was past midnight on Nexus Prime, but sleep had become impossible since his interview with Sergeant Major Kim 3 weeks ago. Her words kept echoing in his mind. You didn't understand what our weapons were. The quantum encrypted data core from the Kepler 442C monument sat before him, humming quietly as his decryption program slowly broke through layer after layer of human security. Each breakthrough revealed more questions and answers, making him wonder what the humans had really been hiding in these stone structures. His door chimed softly. Jin Su entered carrying 2 cups of hot tea, looking as tired as his mentor felt. Still working on the monument data? The young assistant asked, setting 1 cup beside Kong Ho's workstation. I can't stop thinking about what the human said. These monuments were more than just memorials. They had to be. Kong Ho rubbed his tired eyes and took a sip of the warm tea. Look at this latest decryption layer. The holographic display above his workbench showed a 3-dimensional map of the entire Kepler 442C battle. But this wasn't just a tactical overview. It was a complete record of every decision made during the fight. Timestamps showed exactly when each unit moved, when each order was given, and when each soldier fell. It's like watching the battle happen in real time, Jin Su whispered. But that wasn't all. The database contained something even more extraordinary. the final thoughts and actions of every soldier who died in the battle. Not just humans, but hegemony soldiers too. Somehow, the humans had recorded and analyzed everything, even their enemies' tactics and decision-making processes. How did they get this information about hegemony forces? Kang Ho wondered aloud. The answer came when he accessed another data layer. The humans had been interviewing captured enemy soldiers, treating their wounded enemies in field hospitals, and even recording the final words of dying hegemony warriors. They had gathered intelligence not through torture or force, but through compassion and medical care. Jin Su's communicator suddenly began beeping with urgent priority alerts. Dr. Kang Ho, you need to see the news feeds from the outer colonies. The laboratory's main screen activated, showing news reports from across the galaxy. On Arcturus V, the local population had built a crude stone monument to honor rebels who had died fighting hegemony rule. On the mining world of Kepler, 288b, workers had carved names into the wall of an abandoned tunnel, names of colleagues who had been executed for organizing labor strikes. It's happening on dozens of worlds, Jin Su said, his voice filled with growing alarm. They're copying the human monuments. More reports flooded in. On the agricultural planet Harvest Moon, farmers had planted trees in formation, each one representing a family member who had disappeared during hegemony crackdowns. The trees spelled out messages of hope and resistance that could be read from orbit. Dr. Kang Ho felt his blood run cold as understanding began to dawn. The monuments weren't just databases of military information. They were something else entirely. He turned back to the Kepler 442c data core and ran a different type of analysis, not looking for tactical information, but for patterns of inspiration and motivation. What he found changed everything. Every story in the Monuments database was carefully chosen and arranged to teach specific lessons. Captain Chen's sacrifice showed the importance of protecting civilians. Lieutenant Park's final stand demonstrated how one person could hold off an entire enemy unit. Private Yoon's decision to tend wounded enemies proved that humanity could be maintained even in war. Their instruction manuals, Kang Ho breathed, not just for military tactics, but for how to remain human while fighting. The true genius of the human strategy became clear. The monuments weren't just recording history. They were shaping the future. Every person who visited one learned not just what happened, but how to think about resistance, sacrifice, and hope. Jin Su pulled up more news feeds. The reports were getting worse from the hegemony's perspective. On world after world, oppressed populations were building monuments to their own heroes and martyrs. Each new memorial became a gathering place for whispered conversations about freedom and resistance. They're not just copying the human monuments, Jin Su realized. They're improving on them. Look at this one from the Rigel system. The image showed a monument that incorporated holographic displays, quantum storage devices, and even small meeting spaces where people could gather and share stories. The local population had taken the human concept and adapted it to their own culture and technology. Dr. Kang Ho's hand shook as he accessed the final layer of the monument's database. What he found there made him understand the true scope of what the humans had accomplished. It was a message recorded by Sergeant Major Kim herself just before the final battle on Kepler 442c. To whoever finds this record, we know we're going to lose this battle, probably this war. But we're not building these monuments for ourselves. We're building them for everyone who comes after. Every oppressed species, every conquered world, every person who refuses to give up hope. You'll know what to do with these stories. You'll know how to use them. The fight doesn't end when we fall. It just changes hands. The laboratory fell silent, except for the quiet humming of equipment. Dr. Kang Ho stared at the message, finally understanding what Sergeant Major Kim had meant. The humans hadn't lost the war. They had transformed it into something else entirely. Something that couldn't be defeated with weapons alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the memorial garden on Haven's Rest, a small colony world on the edge of hegemony space. Former Sergeant Major Soo-Jin Kim walked slowly between the rows of newly carved stones, her weather hands trailing along their smooth surfaces. The Galactic Council had released her 2 weeks ago, finally understanding that keeping her prisoner only made the growing rebellion stronger. Young Jinwoo approached her nervously, his hands fidgeting with a small data pad. At 19, he represented the local resistance cell, though he looked more like a scared student than a revolutionary. Behind him, other young colonists gathered at a respectful distance, waiting for answers. "Sergeant Major," Jinwoo began, his voice uncertain, "the Elder sent me to ask you something. The hegemony garrison here has weapons we can't match. They have armored vehicles and air support. How are we supposed to fight them?" Soo-Jin stopped beside a particular stone marker and placed her palm flat against its surface. The name carved there read, "Private Minho Choi, died defending the school on Kepler, 442C, age 20. His last words, 'Tell my sister I kept my promise.'" "Son," she said quietly, "you're asking the wrong question." Jinwoo looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You asked how to fight an enemy with better weapons. But that's not what this is about." She gestured to the monument around them, where dozens of names were carved into stone and metal. Every person named here died fighting something bigger than just enemy soldiers. "I don't understand." Soo-Jin turned to face the young man, her brown eyes reflecting decades of experience and loss. "Tell me, what do you know about Private Choi?" Jinwoo consulted his datapad. He was 20 years old, died on Kepler, 442C, defending a school from hegemony forces. "That's just facts," Soo-Jin said. "What was his story?" The young man looked uncertain, so Soo-Jin activated the monument's built-in display system. A holographic image appeared showing a young human soldier, barely older than Jinwoo himself, standing guard outside a small building while children's voices could be heard inside. Private Choi had orders to retreat when hegemony forces approached, Soo-Jin explained. His unit was falling back to a more defensible position, but he heard children singing inside the school. The teacher was trying to keep them calm while evacuation transports arrived. The hologram showed hegemony soldiers advancing down the street toward the school. Private Choi should have run. Instead, he took position behind a makeshift barricade and opened fire. He held that position for 6 hours, Soo-Jin continued, long enough for every child in that school to escape. He died alone, but he saved 43 young lives. Jinwoo stared at the holographic display, watching as a young soldier made his final stand. But he could have lived if he'd followed orders. "Yes," Soo-Jin agreed, "and 43 children would have died." Other resistance members had gathered closer now, drawn by the story. Soo-Jin looked at each of their young faces, seeing the same uncertainty and fear that she had once felt as a new recruit. "Do you know what happened to those children?" she asked. Jinwoo shook his head. "They grew up. They became teachers, doctors, engineers, parents. And every one of them told their children about Private Choi, about the human soldier who chose their lives over his own." Soo-Jin's voice grew stronger. Those 43 children became 400 adults who refused to accept hegemony rule, who built their own monuments, who told their own stories of resistance. The hologram shifted to show other scenes, memorial services, children placing flowers at monuments, adults sharing stories around dinner tables. The impact of one soldier's sacrifice rippling outward like waves in a pond. "This is happening everywhere," Soo-Jin said, gesturing to the data streams flowing across the monument's display. News reports showed similar gatherings on dozens of worlds. Workers in factories sharing stories during lunch breaks. Students learning about heroes in underground schools. Families teaching children songs that honored the dead and inspired the living. "The hegemony doesn't understand," she continued. "They think they can stop this by destroying monuments and arresting storytellers. But you can't kill an idea with weapons. You can't conquer hope with fear." Jinwoo looked around at his fellow resistance members, then back at the monument. "So, what do we do?" "We do what humans have always done," Soo-Jin replied. "We remember. We learn. We teach. We build." "Build what?" Soo-Jin smiled, the same expression that had worried interrogator Zephyron weeks ago. "We build monuments where others build weapons. We honor the dead by protecting the living. We fight not because we hate what's in front of us, but because we love what's behind us. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. On Arcturus V, former slaves were carving the names of freedom fighters into cave walls. On the industrial world of Titan's Forge, workers were creating hidden shrines to honor colleagues who had died in unsafe conditions. Each monument became a gathering place, a school, a symbol of defiance. The hegemony's intelligence reports grew increasingly desperate. Admiral Korthval's final transmission to command headquarters captured their growing frustration. We can destroy their weapons, but we cannot destroy their stories. We can kill their leaders, but we cannot kill their memories. How do we fight an enemy that turns every defeat into victory, every death into inspiration? The answer came from a small human child visiting her first monument with her grandmother. When asked why the names of both friends and enemies were carved together, she replied with the simple wisdom her species had always possessed. Because everyone teaches us something, even if they don't mean to. The revolution had begun, not with guns or bombs, but with stories carved in stone and planted in hearts across the galaxy.